Okay, I think we're ready to go. Thank you so much for coming back to the Ingo stage. I'm moderating the Ingo stage, but I'm actually just a panelist for this session. So this is one of those weird intro moments where I welcome you to the Ingo stage, but then immediately hand over to the moderator of this particular session, which is Tim.
It's one of those Spider-Man memes, we're all standing like that. Well, thank you all for coming. It's great to be here. So we're going to talk about tech stacks and how you can build the ultimate tech stack to transform your events business. So I'm Tim. I'm the founder and CEO of Grip, and we do event engagement, apps, floor plans, and other sorts of tech. But today we're going to be talking with Vanessa, who is the interim head of strategy at the Financial Times Live. And she's got a lot of experience with building tech stacks, both on the organizer side during her time at IQPC, as well as on the supplier side, working at both Glisser and Notified. And she told me she's seen over 25 different tech stacks in depth over her career. So definitely a bunch of knowledge there. So thank you,
It's great
Vanessa,
to be
for joining
here,
us.
as always.
And then we were just talking here on stage, and Adam was talking about that he can write code in 5 different languages. So he really knows his stuff there.
I'm not saying I can do it well.
Well,
Hey, you can do it.
I can do it.
Yeah, exactly. So Adam has launched over his career 4 events that have generated over 1 million in revenue, especially in the tech space.
At launch. And then we went on.
Yeah. Very, very impressive. He saved 7 organizers an average of £80,000 per annum on their technology stacks. So it doesn't mean that necessarily you have to spend more in order to improve your technology stacks, which is quite important. And is there anything else that I'm missing, which you should add?
Is that American enough?
Is that American enough?
Tim asked us to big ourselves up.
Yeah, he was like saying we're too British and we're like too
polite. So I said, you got to actually say.
Yeah. So this is my American introduction. You can do better than that. Come on,
I will add one thing in, Tim, just because I think it represents us as a well-balanced panel. That whilst Adam can do 5 different languages, I can't code at all. So you've got the full spectrum here. So whilst I've worked with a lot of tech, I coded once, almost by accident. So full range.
Very, very good, definitely. So yeah, thank you all for joining us. So what we're going to jump in is first question, Adam, for you. Is there a difference between your event tech stack and your tech stack?
No. But that's a really boring answer for you guys what are listening. I don't believe there is. If you look at where you can sweat the most outcome for your event, for example, if you look at the personalization technology around I'm going to resist mentioning names of platforms because I don't think that's helpful. But if you look at some of the advances in omni-channel communication platforms that allow you to personalize audience acquisition and journeys into the event, if you quantify the value of those to the event in terms of delivering an audience, it is way higher than what would be called event tech, right? But it works really well when you connect it up with event tech, like you've got an app at the show, and if that can feed back information into that personalization engine, let's call it that, you get a really good resolution about where your primary audience is, what they look like behaviorally, rather than based on structured data. So I don't think there is I don't think you can run around and go, ooh, let's have some event tech. You got to look at what's the maximization of outcome I want for my event. And everybody wants a bigger audience. Now, how do we get that and what do we need to use, for example? Is that good enough? Better than no?
Well, I think I can add into this. When Adam shared this concept with me for the first time, that it's just tech. It's not necessarily that we have to label it all as event tech. I did have a bit of a light bulb moment. I was like, yeah, that's so true, because I spend most of my day stressing out over Salesforce integrations, quite honestly. That's not event tech, but it fundamentally has a hugely significant impact on the overall event success. And then when I started to look at all of the different technologies that comprise the tech stacks that I have worked on, and certainly the one that I'm working on now, some of those technologies are not event tech by the label. So I actually think this is a really good point. And I also feel this helps us to spread our meaning within businesses beyond just the world of events necessarily.
I think we need to go to Adam Parry and rebrand Event Tech Live to just Tech Live to broaden the scope a
We can
little
take
bit.
the whole of Excel next year.
Exactly. So kind of thinking about when you're building a tech stack, where do you start? How do you start with building that and thinking about it?
So where you start is with what you're trying to achieve and what your customers need you to do for them, which is a very generic answer, I realise, but it's so, we're in a room filled with all sorts of different tech solutions, many of which are like, ooh, interesting, exciting, but actually you only should be ever considering technology that serves your needs and your customers' needs, ideally in equal measure. So when it comes to where you start, it's working out where you are, where you want to get to, and what the definition of that is and what will help you get there. I think that's where I would start at a very, very top level.
So I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've come to the belief that the reason why we run events, stands, this stuff, all features and functions, right, is to maximize information exchange, to accelerate knowledge. So you come in here, you listen to us drone on, you get a bit more information which accelerates your knowledge about tech. You can then make decisions. You can go, yes, I want this, no, I don't want this. And when you start looking at it through that lens, like those two, and there's two others in my framework, picking myself up, you look at everything very differently and you go, okay, does this piece of tech help that outcome or doesn't it? And it allows you to triage things very, very simply. And some tech out there, so real world example, we're working with a client, they bought this tech which apparently miraculously gave you the work email based off their personal email. Cost a fortune. We looked at it and it only really worked about 10% of the time. So when you aggregate that up, it's a lot of money and you can solve that problem differently. So I'm echoing what you're saying. When you look at the problem, it becomes very easy to triage out what's valuable.
I think I would add an extra layer on that. Dig deep on how far the first early technology solutions are assessing will take you on your journey. So you gave an example there of 10%. I have worked in many events businesses, and the amount of times I've heard in all of those businesses, oh, we can't do that because the tech doesn't enable us to do it. So your tech should be enabling you to do more, grow more, stretch yourself further. It shouldn't be inhibiting that growth. And actually, whilst it might help you achieve objective A, it might not help you achieve objective B. It might even impede you from achieving objective B. There was a lot of vowels there. I think I stumbled over those a bit. But it's you've got to really take a full spectrum view of the technology solutions that you're assessing.
Definitely. I think one thing is interesting is like thinking about it not maybe as something static. You have a tech stack roadmap, right? Like you've got where you are now that is facilitating a certain customer experience, but as you increase your number of shows, as your audiences increase per show, as your needs and personalization or other things come in, you're constantly evolving that. So thinking about what is good today might be something that you know is not going to be suitable at a further kind of moment in time. And I think, Adam, this is like as the media CTO coming into those businesses, you said, well, the first thing I often do is rip out a bunch of tech. I want you to elaborate on that. What is it what you see most often when you come into an organization and you say like, oh, this needs to change and I'm going to take some tech out?
I call it like aspirational tech, where tech has been sold and bought based on, oh my God, that sounds really good. I think that'll solve the problem. And you end up with a load of stuff like that, cluttered all around. And none of it really talks to each other. So we always go into how do you harmonize the participant experience and which tech is helping that, which is hindering it. And for us to do the job we do, we almost need to reset. And time is the enemy of change. So we rip it out quickly we're almost like method actors, go in and work with the company and then put stuff in to achieve the outcome that people wanted to get. So, you know, we work in a very outcome-centric way, because I see it all the time. You like, let's take a look at digitizing service, right? So you go on LinkedIn, people go, hey, I'm looking at digitizing service, and people just shout out the answer without understanding the question. And they're like, you need Zendesk, you need this, you need that. You might, but what you really need to do is look at your service design and go, how on earth, what do I need in order to move from chaos to digital? And how does that map? You do all of that first, and then go and find the right tech that will help you.
I've got another thought to layer on. When you're implementing technology, and this could be into an established tech stack, or it could be right early stage, consider how your implementation plan of that piece of technology will impact you immediately, shorter term, maybe sort of call it 12 months away, and try and think about 24, 36 months away as well, and how committed you are comfortable with being to that piece of technology, and how committed you are comfortable being with potentially integrating that technology with other bits of technology that you might already be using. And I give this example, I'm thinking of one very specific example where I worked with a business. It was a couple of years ago now, and they had a registration system that was so fundamentally built into their business and the way that they ran their business, because it was integrated with other tech stacks, they couldn't get rid of it. So when you say rip out technology, I'm pretty sure there were some people in that business who would have quite liked to rip that piece of technology out, but they couldn't, because they literally wouldn't have been able to take event registrations, and it would have taken them probably a minimum of 18 months to transition away from that piece of technology. Now, from the event technology providers, this is awesome. And I'm not saying it's wrong or bad at all. I've been an event technology provider. You want to be stuck right in there, but only if it serves that customer's purpose in the long run. You don't want to end up being that piece of technology that they can't get rid of. You want to be that piece of technology that they want to continue working with and need to continue working with, because it helps them achieve their objectives. So just think as well, short term, a little bit long, medium term, but also what's this going to look like 24, 36 months away, which can feel quite overwhelming at the time, but I do think it's a very important part of building a stack that really serves your purposes.
And I think, to echo that, I think event tech providers, sorry,
Poor
Tim.
Tim, we're accidentally giving him a real slam.
Have got a little bit of a problem, right? Because you start off being a registration system, and then someone says, hey, can you do XYZ on the website? Yeah, I can do that. We quite like to send some emails. Can you do that? And next thing you know, you're already like an email system and a registration system. Maybe you really think about it, right? Why are there customized email solutions? Because they're spending all day, every day, looking at the next thing, the next analytics, and you can't keep up. So quite often we go in and we see these monoliths, and we're like going, listen, half of this system will not give you the most advanced communications personalization engine. It just can't, because you can't keep up. You're in an arms race against, HubSpot and people like that. So I think we need to just look at the interplay as well, very differently.
So I think there are a couple of things on this. I once said all-in-one is the same as all-in-none when it comes to event tech. Because I think that a lot of organizers, right, when you start evaluating a particular piece of a particular problem that you need to solve, it often starts with some form of checklist. Hey, I've got all these things, and does it do it, yes or no? And it's a very binary decision. And for our teams, when we evaluate technology internally that we want to bring in, like, for example, a marketing automation system or anything else, I actually have the team write user stories. So I say, okay, as a marketer, I want to be able to send emails so that I can reach our customers in a personalized way. So being able to actually start, first of all, evaluate what you want to achieve when you want to bring in a piece of technology based on a user story rather than just a statement, being able to send emails, and then rather than actually setting that up in a kind of binary ways, just giving a score, like 1 to 10, for example. So actually, like, how good is this tool? Is it? Because it's not binary, right? Like, there are many things that can send an email. It doesn't mean that it's good at sending an email. And then I think the last step is actually attaching some KPIs to that as part of it as well, being able to say, actually, what is it that we're looking to achieve here, and holding yourself responsible for that when you come back at it, and once it's implemented, you look at actually did it improve this particular metric, why we implemented this technology. If it didn't, well, maybe you should rip it out again. And I think that's the other part, right? Like, I think often something gets implemented and then it's like, well, it's there now, so now we can't get rid of it anymore. But actually, like, kind of develop the method to be able to continuously review something.
I think there's also the emotional commitment that one puts into implementing a piece of technology as well. So you said it's there now, we just got to use it, but there's also that we've just spent 12 months trying to make this work. We've got to keep trying. I'm so pleased you talked there about the customer sort of mapping, the customer experience, because I know I said that right back at the beginning as well, and Adam has said it too, but I'm doing exactly that right now. We have 2 different platforms that we're amongst the tech stack, 2 different platforms that we run alongside each other. And about 3 weeks ago, after reviewing multiple bits of feedback, we identified that we were not running them together well for our customers. Guess what? It's bloody brilliant for us from a data perspective, but it is an awful customer experience. So we are mapping out that customer experience and pretty much done it now at this stage. And now it's a case of how do we improve this to what we know it should be. Our customers have told us what it should be, whilst also getting the data points that we really want to get out of these 2 platforms. And I mean, is this hard? It's going to be a difficult project, but we have to do it. We can't just serve ourselves, we have to serve our customers.
It's a nice segue to the next kind of thing I want to talk about. So, like, talking about data and kind of customer data, all the rage nowadays is customer data platforms or data lakes. So Adam, what moment do I, as an organizer, start thinking about implementing a CDP, and why should I implement a CDP?
That's a really tough one to answer.
I agree.
Let's look.
You're welcome.
Look at the outcome of what a CDP does, right? And again, I'm not going to mention any names of actual platforms. They are built to ingest lots of data sources and build a customer profile. Deloitte said on average it's 28 different data sources from your GA, your marketing automation, all of that sort of stuff comes in. The reason for it is to hyper-personalize and micro-segment all those journeys. Now, if you as a business are struggling to use the personalization functions of your existing marketing automation thing, a CDP will explode your mind. You won't be able to use it because it requires a completely different way of looking at your audience acquisition, how the journeys flow and map. You need to be very agile. You don't just map it and then it runs. It's constantly evolving and iterating. It's an incredibly different way of looking at the world. So if you want to be that micro-personalized, the first question you should ask yourself, do we have the team to do it? Do we have the skills to do it? And how long will it take us to activate this platform? Otherwise, it'll become an integration job, and you'll do it for 18 months, and you'll integrate away, and you'll be using something really expensive just to send emails again, or whatever. So be very careful, because people shout out new trends, but you've got to be able to maximize their value. Even when marketing automation first came out, right, showing my age, right, we used to just send emails, and then we would say, ooh, this can be personalized. But it took a while for people to understand how one single multivariate personalized email can do the job of 30 email blasts. And be comfortable with that, right? Because we're human, right? You've done this, this, and this, and you're asking for real change.
You say you share your age. I used to send letters out to invite people to my conferences, even faxes, I think. So CDPs, I do think they offer huge long-term potential, but I really want to focus on that word long-term. I'm very much involved at present in aligning the event portion. So I work at the Financial Times. They have a very large live events business. But as you guys probably know, we have many, many, many other lines of business too, not just the newspaper that you can probably picture in your heads now, but all sorts of other subscriptions, digital subscriptions, specialist brands that you wouldn't necessarily know are owned by the FT, all sorts going on behind the scenes. And the customer data platform for that sort of business is a beast. And I joined there in May. I estimate there may be 2 or 3 proper years into it. And I think it's probably 2 or 3 more years before real value is being served across the whole business. So there are certain portions of the business that are seeing hyper-personalization from it. And I mean, honestly, incredible marketing material coming out of it that as yet hasn't served the events business, but I've seen it, and I've seen that level of personalization, and my God, it gives me goosebumps for how we could be able to improve the attendee and the sponsor experience at events. But the reason I really emphasize on this long-term point, and I think I'm going to go back to what I said about think about the short-term, 12 months, 36-ish months, is for the events portion of the business in a business of this scale, from beginning to when the events business sees the benefit of that CDP, it's probably going to be about 5 years, realistically.
Unless you start from scratch.
Right. So, but I think it's interesting, right? So, like, okay, you know, FT very large, work both with organizers of kind of different shades and sizes. Give me a concrete answer. When do I start with thinking about that? When I do, 5 events a year with 10,000 people, when I've got, what is kind of the size that I start thinking about, like a CDP? Because I think it actually becomes very a lot.
Look, the cost of accessing a CDP is not that high. So it goes back to the skills. A basic CDP, right? It really isn't that high.
Okay.
So I think the answer to that is, how committed are you to personalizing journeys for all participants? And that includes speakers. My speaker journey to this event sucked. Right? The amount of platforms I had to log into and go from one thing to the other.
Mine was fine.
There you go. Well, you've been here, but you know the jam, right? I don't. It's the first time I'm talking, right? I'm like going, what is this? Oh, we're proud to announce another platform that you need to log into. Great, thanks. So if you're committed to that level of hyper-personalization, then you can start now, right?
Yeah, so just
I was actually going to say something very similar. That I don't think there is a too early stage, but actually I think it's also think about the longer term.
Yeah.
So how much data are you ultimately going to be dealing with? What's your longer term plan? Because to your point of ripping stuff out, do you need it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think like what is interesting there as well is like, I've seen some major organizers, like top 20 ones that have implemented it, and now all their data sits in the system, and it's all like, yay, we've completed this project. And then they've realized...
You're never completed.
Well, they've gotten all their data that they were planning to get into their CDP, and it's now all nice, like, tech stack, and this sits in the middle of it. And then they're like, well, now we need to do something with it. And now it needs to go back into another tool and actually to personalize any type of experience.
So that's like personas, right? You get a
Yeah.
marketing consultant come in and say, oh, you need to do some personas. You map all these personas. Then you stick the freaking personas in your top drawer and you don't look at it again, right? You either use it actively or you don't, and you engage with it, and everybody starts lining up behind it.
I do have a particular thought with regards to the event title on custom data platforms, which whilst for the FT it's a long process. I do feel very excited about when we get to the point that our existing technology solutions are truly integrated and working with that customer data platform, because it will generate great results. So I think bring it back to tech stacks specifically, I'm just going to say event tech stacks whilst we're here, I do think they offer great long-term potential.
Yep. So moving on a bit to actually something that we started touching upon, where there is a question about as well, which is kind of skill set, mindset, and kind of people. So in small event companies, do you see a specific role who's managing the tech stack, or is it competence part of many job profiles? How might this change in the future?
This is not a politically correct answer, but it's the truth. We work with a lot of small organizers. What I usually find happens is that there is an aspiration to digitize, or whatever word you want to use, and you go, yeah, we want to do that, and then it gets handed off to the tech guy. And in some cases, the tech guy was the guy who configures your computers and things like that, right? And it just fails, because everybody needs to be involved in that process continually. It's not something that, you cannot abdicate responsibility by saying, I am not technical, right? And you don't have to be technical. You don't have to be afraid of it. You've got to break it. But you need to be involved in it. So many times I've started working with marketing departments and yeah, but it doesn't work for us. It's what they did. Right? So you've got the technical they. They did it and it's not working for us. I was like, well, you've just wasted, 6 months. It's got to be driven by the team that's going to use it.
I've got two thoughts on this. Firstly, don't be afraid of the tech. Exactly what Adam just said. You can't break it. You can't. Tim and his team build amazing tech that you can't break. This is what's so great about it. Can we break it?
You can. Everything can be broken, but it can always be fixed. So that's the more important point.
It's hard for you to break it. I'm going to keep maintaining that. But you have to have a voice of the business. That's what I would call it, which I think is the same thing that Adam is saying here, which might be the managing director, it might be a more junior person who is really passionate about getting this right. I don't think it actually matters who that person is, as long as they really give a shit about this working and they are willing and able to communicate between whoever is doing the technical work and the rest of the business. So if I do take within the FT a completely different business unit to the current unit that I'm working in, they're doing a huge data transformation project next year, and they are putting in one person 1 day a week who is not a technical person at all to be exactly that, the voice of the business, to make sure that everything that is built and created serves the purposes of the business. Because if you do hand over all of that responsibility, if you do outsource it, there's nothing wrong with outsourcing this as well, I don't think, but you have to be so thorough on making sure that that end goal is met, because distractions along the way, lack of clarity and communication, and before you know it, you've invested in building some sort of technology solution that actually doesn't serve your purpose.
Yeah, completely agree. I think key points are have business leaders or leader involved throughout the process from the very start. Make sure that you've got one single person that's kind of responsible in some kind of setting for the implement, like some kind of a single implementer, project manager effectively. And that person doesn't have to be the most technical in the room necessarily, it just needs to be a great project manager. And then you need to bring all these other resources in. I think the point is very true. It often gets handed over, it's kind of shipped over the fence. Hey, there's the tech team, they go and build it now. They come back 6 months later or however long later, and it's like, well, this is not what we expected. And it was all built based on a single drawing, like it needs to do this, right?
I think that applies to any tech, not just customer data platforms.
Yeah, well, for sure, it applies to any tech, and also like how you build products, right? So it's very similar to how you build a tech stack to how you build a product, kind of a software product. Next question here: how important are API integrations for a tech stack to be successful?
That's a great question.
Vital.
Vital?
If you want to get the most out of your tech stack, they will likely help you. However, I also know, having been both supplier and organizer side, it's really hard to sometimes get them in. So you've got to also think about, we talked a bit about this in our prep, your minimal viable product, MVP version, that has to be workable too. It has to function, it has to perform something for you, because that's your proof point. So likely your MVP version of whatever your tech stack is going to be transforming towards may not include all of the APIs that you want in it. Make sure it still works, I think is what I would say, but expect that you're probably going to get high performance once you have got APIs in place.
Yeah. I also think that there is an increased focus for many platforms now on kind of native integration. So rather than using some kind of middleware tool like a Blender or a Zapier or one of those things, I think a lot of providers here in this room are starting to think more, how can we work directly with each other to have some form of native integration where it's just a connect C event with Visible or something like that, just to name an example, right?
Controversial.
Very controversial. So like, but I think that's starting to happen happen more and more, which I think is important. So rather than kind of the organizer being responsible for kind of being the middleware and the middle person between those two tech companies, it's actually kind of falling more on the tech companies themselves.
But I don't see what's wrong with Zapier and all that stuff.
I think that there is value in those tools as well. I think that the robustness of them can sometimes have its limitations. I also think that you can end up in some sticky situations where when you're sending a lot of data back and forth, it can become quite tricky.
But if you're doing a POC, right, and you're just seeing, will this work?
Proof of concept.
Yeah, it's the fastest way to go.
Yes.
I do agree with you, Adam. However, I've worked in 2 companies where Zaps were not allowed.
Yeah.
And so it's not, I agree, when you're able, and certainly again, proof of concept, MVPs, getting going, dreamy. Just if you're not allowed, you've got to come up with other solutions.
Yeah, that can be because of the kind of data processing kind of rules around those tools, right? So there can be alternatives to Zapier that are kind of more better data processing rules around that, which is also something to consider. Now, this is an interesting one. So almost none of us start with a tech stack on a blank page. So the challenge for most of us is how can we change it? What recommendations regarding the change in the tech stack do you have? And yeah, curious.
Without wanting to dodge the question, I do think this comes back to what you need to achieve. And we also, when we were prepping for this, that I sort of said affectionately for event planners that failure is not an option because you can't put on an event that fails. And I think that mindset sort of proliferates itself out into actually many ways that we work. That failure is not an option. Everything has to be just as it should be all the time and get it right. And in reality, we have to accept that sometimes we do things wrong. We might put in a piece of technology that works, does what it needs to do for a period of time, and then actually the business has evolved and changed and it doesn't serve its purpose anymore. And I think we have to be really, really honest with ourselves that sometimes you've got to take stuff out. So you've got to get yourself closer to that blank canvas piece of paper where you can start from scratch. In reality, I recognise you can't do that, but sometimes it's a case of, imagine having a rubber or an eraser if you're from across the pond, and you've got to think about taking things back and getting that page blanker. And if you do that, how can you change your journey from that point onwards? So I think for me that is less often of a technical inhibiting challenge. It's not the tech that stops you doing that, it's actually us that stops us doing that because we don't want to go backwards to go forwards.
I'd agree with that. And a lot of it comes down to your data architecture, in my view. So when we go into business, a lot of our job is creating customized data models and dashboards to show the result of activity and codify an event like this into its performance, into its true performance. And when you have your data if you be very careful when you have one system that owns all your data, right? If you think about it in a microservices, there should not be one system that owns all your data. So if let's say you have a webinar platform, and in a lot of businesses we go into, the webinar platform owns the webinar data. But if you work it in such a way that it comes back to whatever else you're using as your CRM or your MA, you can orchestrate much better journeys. And the ownership, it still has data in that webinar platform because it needs to do log me in and watch the thing and all that sort of stuff. But there is no single platform that owns the data. So we had a customer that said, look, the last mile execution of this current platform is not working well for us because we want ABC. We pulled it out, put a new one in a week. And it's a very different mindset about how you do that. When it's a rule we follow, no one platform owns the data.
Sorry, Justin, you've given me some inspiration on this data point, going back to the blank sheet of paper. Use the data to evidence why you might need to take some product out and you might need to change some technology. Use the data that's already available to you, performance data.
Yeah, I also think related to that, right? Like when you start implementing a piece of tech, I think always have almost drawn up how are you going to get rid of it again. it's kind of like going into a contract knowing how you can kind of break it again. I think that's very important to be aware of, that you can think, okay, this is how I can close it down again if needed, or quickly migrate. I also think the kind of quick migration point is an interesting one. A lot of organizers, we kind of operate in this industry in a kind of a waterfall way, right? Like we look at a show kind of maybe even after our current show cycle, 15 months away, and like, okay, this is what we're doing, we need to change this. We then make that change, and then we wait until after the show in order to really reevaluate it. So you end up in this very slow cycle of change. And I think what is important to start thinking about is like, how can I speed up that pace of change? Could I, for example, try something out, but rather than waiting until my show, can I just change it a month later? So I don't have to wait that entire cycle. So you become more agile, and you start developing that muscle to evaluate things on the go and actually think about it more in an agile way. Related question, actually, Adam, to what you just brought up. No one system should own all my data. Here is a very specific question. From your experience, what works better? One-stop solution like Cvent, or an a la carte solution where you pick the tools that you like and manage the integrations?
Depends what you want to do. Look, there are some customers where Cvent will work. There are others who really started committing to trying to do different things as part of the acquisition process. So we've got such tight NDAs, I can't mention people, but it was like when the acquisition happens, if they're a tier one, we want to hook it into a video messaging thing. I think we use Bonjoro in that thing, where the conference producer would say, hey, welcome, da-da-da, the event's going to do-da-da, and do that, right? So if you are of the mindset that you want to innovate on that journey, because I believe that, there is still so much work to be done in that landing to the event from all participants. How do I land this participant at my event? What moments of elevation, connection, those power moments do I want to design into that journey? If you want to do that, you need to own your registration experience. And you can do that with Cvent, because you can say, okay, that'll register, and you can hook that registration thing out into your participation engine, let's call it that, because it'll usually be 2 or 3 different things. You can, but then you're paying a ton of cash for a form. Right?
I think it depends on the business itself, to a certain extent. So
you're way more diplomatic than I am.
The solutions, to change it up. Personally, I would love everyone to always be able to create that rich patchwork quilt tapestry style of the perfect tech for their needs. In reality, some businesses don't always have the level of resource to be able to build that patchwork quilt. So sometimes, from a business perspective, a one-stop shop may suit the business better, but this is where you've got to start balancing out again what's better for your customers versus better for you. So whilst in my dreams everyone would have a perfectly bespoke, custom-created tech stack, in reality, I also like to think I'm a realist as well as a diplomat, that's not always possible. So do think about your real resource capabilities as well.
Yeah, I think for me, first of all, it depends on the type of company that you are. So if you're a corporate that does a couple of hundred roundtables, conferences, maybe user conference, I think kind of the right direction is probably like I would start with thinking first an all-in-one solution, then I would kind of move on from there, to be completely honest. Because if you're a head of events in a big corporate or a field marketer, you've got so many different things that are part of it, and the event is not the product itself, right? Like Salesforce Dreamforce is not the product. They're doing Dreamforce to sell CRM systems, right? So like whereas if you're a commercial organizer, the event itself is the product. And so the tech stack is part of that value prop. So you want to make sure that if you've got a kind of a slightly unique value prop, you probably want to think more earlier and more deliberately about the tech stack that you have, and therefore being able to extend it is important. There is also a big difference between being kind of, if you have one platform that does a lot of it, it's important to think about what if you want to do one thing differently, and this is a very important point. Cvent and others like that do a lot are great for many things, but then it's about making sure that there is the flexibility to add one thing onto it, and this is often trickier because like you have a group of technologies that are maybe very good at being very open and integrating with everything that's out there, and there's a group of technologies that are much more closed down. And for the closed down ones, I think it's important to make sure that there is that flexibility without incurring large amounts of cost to be able to add something onto it that is specific to your type of business. Just here bringing up the other question. There was actually a piece of feedback on the Zapier point earlier. I never know how to pronounce it, Zapier or Zapier.
I think it's Zapier. I would say Zapier.
So feedback from an organizer, we do not use software that is not on Zapier because we're quicker set up integrations. Problems also arise with native integrations. Usually it takes longer to fix issues compared to Zapier. Comments?
I agree.
I love that. Yeah, do what works for you. I absolutely love that. If that fits your business,
The
quick, agile,
other
great.
alternative, we use Make a lot, so we use both. The Make.com used to be called Integromat. It gives you an ability to do more complex flows and logic inside them. You can do more gotchas. But yeah, I mean, that's the point, right?
Yep.
That's why they're there. That's why they're successful.
I think this also emphasizes something which you sort of alluded to there about the different sorts of events. Whoever shared that, very different to some of the businesses I've worked in the past, some which were super Zapier friendly, some which weren't. Businesses are different, events are also different, and we are brilliant as event professionals at looping in and trying to do a session that applies to people running 30,000 person exhibitions, that also applies to people who are running 100 people conferences of a leadership nature, and in reality the stacks are going to be different for those. And a piece of advice I would give is try and find your people who are doing the same thing as you and try and compare notes with those guys too.
I think one kind of related question to different shapes and size of tech stack for different types of events and stages of businesses is many I see ending up in a situation where they're responsible for a tech stack. The organization does anywhere from 5+ events, and one of those show directors comes to you and says, my show is different, I need this thing, I need to do this differently. How do you manage the overall vision that you've outlined and thinking where you're working towards compared to somebody saying, I'm different, I want to use a different piece of tech here? How do you find that balance? How do you communicate with them around that?
I think this is around the business case for that variation. So what does the business stand to gain from deviating from the norm? And is it going to be worth the amount of investment, both time and financial, that will go into bringing in that additional piece of tech? If it's worth it and there's a business case that verifies that, then I think it needs to be entertained. If actually going through that business case, it becomes clear that you're either going to end up net in exactly the same position that you were, or it doesn't really add as much value as perhaps that person who's got all the passion for it really believes it's going to, then you've professionally eliminated that deviation from the normal operating model.
And this is why I never worked for very well in big companies, because I call it the insanity meter, right? If it's at that side, you just say no.
Yeah, sometimes it's fine to say no.
Great. There's a lot of talk here about AI, large language models, and so many different things. You know, as you're thinking about the kind of tech stack and the evolution of it, how are you bringing that in? Are you reliant on the individual tools that are in your tech stack to kind of for them to bring this up, or you're thinking more deliberately about it and bringing that into your overall technology ecosystem?
Look, all of that will happen, right? The latest GPT release, right, I spun up a GPT model to plan my sessions here, right?
I did see that on LinkedIn.
It's so easy. And then as another example, so we started pushing out podcasts to just have the conversation about how tech applies properly. My personal bugbear. And I was like, okay, how do we use GPT to create from the transcript, create an article? And that's possible. But now, the tool that we were using, called Descript, have built that in natively. So it's really annoying, because we thought we were doing really well, and we've kind of we kind of built it, right? And it works, but theirs is better. So we're like, ugh, we learnt a bit, but it works. So AI is just going to be part of the fabric. You're going to see it in your marketing automation systems where early adopters like us of AI, we were taking it and we were, anyway, she said finish. You get my point. I'm rambling.
So the last question is, where did the panel get these great socks? So the great socks are grip socks. So if you go to the grip stand, you can get some purple grip socks. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to our panelists. I really appreciate your coming in.
Thank you all very much.
So thank you for joining us on the Ingo